Aloha, everybody. Mahalo nui for joining us. We're going to get started today. We're super grateful to be here over at the Office of Hawaiian Affairs. I'm here to talk today about historic preservation and some changes coming up or proposed changes in the 2020 legislative session. We have with us today Keola Lindsey. Sorry, guys. We have Keola Lindsey, Kamakana, and Lauren over here from Office of Hawaiian Affairs, and they'll be speaking with you folks today. So just a heads up on how we're going to be doing this. They'll be presenting for about 30 minutes, and then we'll open up for a question and answer portion. And so for following along today, there's no PowerPoint, but you can follow along with the resources that we've emailed out to you folks. And with that, we'll get started. Keola?
Aloha mai kākou. Thank you everyone for joining us today. On behalf of the Office of Hawaiian Affairs, I'd like to extend a special mahalo to the Kaliʻuokapaʻakai collective, all of the members and others that are joining us today, as well as Kaile and La'akea who came and helped us get set up here today. We really appreciate this opportunity to talk with you folks. So in addition to Kamakana and Lauren and I, who you're meeting and seeing today, at OHA we do have a pretty big team that works on historic preservation issues overall, and as well as the work at the state legislature. So in addition to all of the other work we do, we're fortunately in a position to have the resources to keep track of historic preservation, overall. But especially when it comes to legislature time, we have a team that's monitoring all of the different bills and measures and goings on at the Capitol, but specifically as it relates to historic preservation, we're able to do that. Just to talk briefly, the sense we have right now overall, before I get into specific bills for the 2020 legislature, is that there seems to be two major themes emerging out. One of them is the strengthening of the process, and that includes like one of the two OHA package bills that we'll talk about a little bit later that talks about increasing fines and strengthening or clarifying violations. There's a couple of bills like that. So that's one of the major themes we're seeing. The other kind of major theme we're seeing is the idea of delegation of historic preservation review back to the counties. And it's taken various forms. Some of the bills that talk about that delegation of review back to the county are pretty defined. It lays out a pretty strong process. Others not as much. So again, generally those are the two things we're seeing that's emerging right now. The delegation to the counties seems to be partially aligned with themes like housing. Folks want to address the housing issue that exists in Hawaii. And one thing that they've identified is that expediting, those are some of the words being used, expediting or streamlining the 6E review will be helpful to get houses built. And I'm not saying that's true or not true, but that seems to be some of the justifications that we're seeing emerge out for why some of these bills are being introduced. So to talk a little bit about the bills that are in what we call the OHA package. So I think, and sorry folks out there, I'm not real technical, so there might be moments where I need to ask La'akea or Kaile for help here, but I think before the webinar, you guys got emailed the link to the OHA webpage. And if you are able to get on there, you'll be able to actually pull up our entire package. And we of course want you folks to look at all, but two in particular, the two in particular, we were hoping you folks will be able to follow along as we're pulling them up. The first one is an actual proposed amendment to the 6E statute. And if you're on the OHA website, you'll be able to pull that up. For those that don't know, generally how the legislature works is sometimes a bill is introduced in both the House and the Senate. So that's why you see right below OHA 3, there's a House version and a Senate version. But when they're introduced, they're identical. And they both work their way through the respective houses, and there's strategies that go along with that. But anyway, if you're there, you'll be able to pull up either of those and start taking a look at the actual text of the bill. And if you go down, if you click on the links right below OHA 3, that'll pull up the status of the bill. If you go down to the bottom of the section of OHA 3 and you click on read the bill, you'll be able to obviously read the bill. And then we've generated white papers to talk about some of the main points of the bill that you'll be able to see. So generally, what OHA 3 is about is clarifying that or identifying a violation of 6E when someone does activity that would have triggered a 6E review, but they didn't do it. So like, for example, if someone was gonna go out and grub or grade their property, and they were supposed to have gotten a county permit and they didn't, that would then become a violation under this statute, under 6E, for violating 6E for also violating the county process. And what that would do is then it would then allow SHPD staff, the second thing this bill does is that it gives SHPD the ability to issue a stop work order for those kind of activities. And again, it's not like any activity, it's just the ones within the definition of what's now a violation within this statute. So the way it works right now is if SHPD goes out and sees something going on under another permit or something, and they want the work to stop, they have to depend on either another county or state agency to stop the work right away. And that takes time, right? It can take a day, 2 days, a week, whatever. And when you're talking about big machines working in the area of historic properties, that can be a concern. The only other way we feel, or OHA feels DLNR can stop work from happening right now is to go to the BLNR, and that takes equally as long, right? So for us, the stop work order is a time issue to protect sites and iwi kūpuna when that's needed. And we feel like SHPD having that authority under this bill is a needed action to prevent activities that we know have happened. They could be happening right now, and they're going to continue happening into the future. The other thing this bill does is increase the violation fine from 10,000 to 25,000. Nothing can bring back sites once they're destroyed or iwi kūpuna when they've been impacted. So the fine isn't really about making it right just by making people pay money. But we hope that it's going to be a deterrent that people will think about what they do if there's a kind of a hefty fine associated with it. And then it'll also, down the line, once there is a violation, and that's been identified and verified, in addition to the fine, when we talk about mitigation, what people have to do to try and mitigate the situation. Again, we know once a site's gone, it's gone. Once iwi kūpuna have been impacted, they've been impacted. But other forms of mitigation, the cost of that would be borne by the landowner or the developers. And then the last major parts of it, and there's other ones, but the last major parts of it, and one that I think is that OHA thinks is especially important is the creation of like a citizen hotline where people can call in specifically to historic preservation to report the violations. Right now, people use like a generic DLNR hotline where you're getting like DoCare, and they deal with all kinds of violations, right? But the hotline would be more specific to historic preservation issues. And the last one that I know from experience is going to be especially helpful is the posting of historic preservation law and process information on job sites. So for those of you that have been to like a construction job site, right? Like at kind of like the lunchroom or whatever, they have like, you know, your rights under the law and like, you know, whatever, minimum wage and you're entitled to leave. Within that now will be an explanation of what people should do if they have concerns about iwi kūpuna or historic preservation. And we know from experience that we've gone out to sites and we've talked to folks that have worked on the job site and they've encountered situations that they've wanted to report, but they just didn't know what to do. So maybe they don't do it or it takes them a while to report it. But we're hopeful that by providing people with the information, they'll know what to do and will be able to deal with the situation quicker and in the right way to, again, not only follow the law and the process, which is important, but equally important is to make sure that, you know, the sites and burials all around Hawaii are being treated correctly according to the process. So I'm gonna kind of turn off camera. Lauren and Kamakana, did I miss anything important on that? Or did you guys want to add anything? I can turn the camera to you.
I think from discussions that we've had with other entities like Hawaiian Archaeology, they had questions on whether or not this bill was applicable to both private property and state property. And to be clear, it is applicable to both 60E and 6042. So if there was any questions about that, putting that out there now, so it's clear that it wouldn't only affect state property, it's also applicable to private property as well.
Sure.
You guys have covered everything.
Mahalo, Kamakana. Yeah, and that's an important distinction to make is that it would, and I don't want to turn this into like an overview of 6E itself, but it would address both parts of 6E, the 6E8, which is for state projects, and then 6E42, which is when the county wants to do something for a private, you know, developer. Again, so the easy example there is like a grading permit, or when someone wants to actually start building and do like a subdivision. Those all come in through the county review under 6042, but it'll address both. And it'll say if you were supposed to do it and you didn't, you know, that's a violation. And when that activity is happening, SHPD can stop the work and we can deal with it as the law and the process should, in consultation with the communities that are affected. So a quick update on this bill. Again, if you go up to the top right below OHA 3 and you click on the House version, HB 1783, that one you'll see in the status that it had a hearing last week and the committee decided to defer it. And what defer means is that it's being held. And the committee chair has to decide to move it forward. So I'm not trying to predict the final fate of this bill, but usually a deferral means it's better to focus in on the Senate version. So yeah, the legislature is moving fast. And yeah, I apologize that we're just getting the chance to present to you guys at this point, but that one already has an update. And it's good if you, again, just real quick while we're on it, for those, so I'm sharing the Hawaii State Legislature screen. Most of you probably really familiar, but just in case you're not, you can pull up the status of a bill by clicking on that. So I entered SB 1783, and that pulled up kind of where things are at. And if you go down to the bottom, you'll see the dates. So you'll see that the bill was heard last week, Thursday, on the 24th, and that the committee recommended that the measure be deferred. But what's helpful when you're on this kind of site is you can also click on the testimony and see what folks are saying about a bill. So the first one in this case is from DLNR. And you can scroll through and see what different people are saying about different bills. But yeah, as a bill moves along, all you got to do is enter the HB or SB number and you can see exactly where it's at. And when a bill does get a hearing, you'll be able to click on a link to submit testimony and share how you're feeling about a given bill. So yeah, just to click on the Senate version real quick, you'll see that the status of that one is that it's been introduced and it's gotten a committee referral. So that, you'll see that down below. So it has 2 committees it has to go to. But the first committee, which is Labor, Culture, and the Arts, and Water and Land, they have not scheduled a hearing yet. So that's one we'll be watching closely to see what happens with that one. So to go back to the OHA package bills, I'll scroll down next to OHA 4, which is actually a resolution, so not a bill proposing to change 6E, but this one is a resolution, which is basically a strong message from the legislature, right? The funders and the makers of laws. What we're asking the legislature to do is just confirm that the reopening of the SHPD administrative rules process is something that is a good thing to do at this point. Like we point out, some of the current administrative rules, so sorry, again, for those that don't know, the statute says what you need to do. So like when you look at 6E, right, it says, consider historic properties and iwi kūpuna, basically. The rules say how you should do it. So like that's all like the super finite details of process. So equally important. And what we're seeing the situation to be is that in the 20 years, 25 years, in the case of the burial rules, that some of these rules have existed and not been changed. We have clear evidence in the application of them that there are issues that need to be addressed through amending the rules, which is basically rulemaking, right? So we've identified areas that we feel are important within the rules to address, but we know that once the rulemaking process opens, every issue addressed by any SHPD rule will be, open for discussion. So even some of the areas that we feel we have the answer to, nothing is like set in stone and predetermined, right? It's a public process, there's hearings, you get to submit testimony and all that. So regardless of what anyone thinks the solution for a rule is, the legislature's resolution can't dictate that, right? It just says, SHPD, go ahead and open it, and all the issues kind of get addressed. So you can read the white paper and look through the actual resolution and the bullet points that are here that kind of identify some of the highlight ones or highlight certain areas that we feel needs to be addressed. A big one is kind of like the 4th bullet point in this narrative right here is for those that deal with like iwi kūpuna issues and have seen kind of the debate between how are some sites called inadvertently discovered or some called previously identified. We feel that clarifying certain parts of the rules will be helpful to address situations that we know are happening today where some big burial site areas continue to be treated as inadvertently discovered sites and follow those processes, where we think it's worth the discussion to talk about those instances, whether maybe they should be previously identified and be afforded, you know, the discussion at burial councils and stuff like that. So kind of the rules. So I'll turn to my colleagues again, Lauren and Kamakana. Did I miss anything in the overview of the rules that you think we should add in? Or?
You got to the key bullet there, because every time we have this discussion with organizations or individuals, the inadvertently discovered reclassification suggestion always comes up as a topic of interest. But you know, that bullet is more so for like extenuating circumstances. For those that don't know, previously identified is usually allotted in cases where burials are found during an AIS or burials are previously registered. And so if it's not found under those circumstances, they'll be classified as inadvertent, and they go through a separate process where SHPD makes a determination on burial disposition. So if you have an AIS that only found like one individual, like one or two individuals, like Maulilani, for example, but then you find all these other burials around it later during construction or exploratory testing, they're classified as inadvertent, while the other two are classified as previously identified. So there's the potential for different burial treatments, and the decision maker, you have the burial council deciding for previously identified, and SHPD for the inadvertently discovered. So in those types of situations, we think some kind of tool or method to reclassify is appropriate and potentially reduce likelihoods of going to litigation, possibly. But yeah.
Cool. Mahalo Kamakana. So for this one, I will click on the Senate version of the resolution, and it will pull up a page, and you'll see that this one has a public hearing scheduled on Thursday at 1:16 in the first of, well, this one only, so you can see the, yeah, so with Hawaiian Affairs and Water and Land. So it has the hearing notices. So if you see where my cursor is, you can click on that. And then if you go down to the bottom of the hearing notice, you can see click here to submit testimony. So after you've read through it, and if you make a decision how you want to do it, you do have to like register and enter a password and stuff. But once you do that, it's pretty easy to enter testimony on, you know, any bill you're interested in. So that's kind of like navigating the process there. But yeah, so out of the two OHA bills that we're talking about today, this one actually has an action coming up pretty quick. You'll notice that the testimony, like in the last one that I clicked on, the House version of OHA 3, that hearing had already happened, so all the testimony was already loaded up. This one for the Thursday hearing, that none of the testimony is available yet. And that varies in our experience. Sometimes the meeting starts or the committee hearing starts and they still don't have the testimony available. But the thing about testimony, just so you know, is that it's ideal that you get it in 24 hours before the hearing. So like in this case, it's at 1:15 on Thursday. You need to go through the online site and submit testimony. Oh, there's another submit testimony link right here. And get it in 24 hours ahead of time. That way you know that it's in the packets that the senators or representatives get to review your thoughts and your position on the bill. If you don't get it in 24 hours ahead of time, it's going to be what they call late. And there's a chance it makes it in, but it gets a big red stamp on it that says late. And at some point, it will be given to the decision makers, but you just don't know when, and you don't know when, if they're going to consider it in decision making. And then of course you always have the option to show up to the committee hearing and, you know, reaffirm your thoughts or anything like that. So yeah, that's the status of one of the two resolutions. Sorry, one of the two versions of the OHA resolution. And obviously for the bill that we talked about earlier and this resolution, because they're coming out of the OHA package, they're bills that we strongly support and see value in, but you know, we encourage, you know, everyone out there to look them over yourselves, you know, if you decide to submit your own testimony or let others know what's going on with them. And then in addition to that, I had sent out a spreadsheet that I think got shared with the collective. I'm not going to spend a lot of time, you know, going over that. I won't say that that's every historic preservation related bill that's in the legislature right now, but it is like I think around 19 of the ones that we're tracking. And just to show you an example of another bill that we're keeping an eye on. So I'll enter SB 2249, and this would be kind of along the theme of strengthening the law as it relates to violations. I'm not going to open up the bill, but you can see that it talks about the idea of a violation for certain archaeological activities. So if you do open the bill, the kind of activities they're talking about is like archaeological monitoring, preservation plans. There might be a kind of some other ones, but so that's again an example of another bill that we're monitoring. We've submitted testimony on, and you can kind of see the status of this one. It's got 2 committee referrals. It was heard already last week, Thursday, and was passed with amendments. So when you click on the site, so all versions of this measure, this was the measure that was introduced and heard by the committee. Like I just said, the measure was passed with amendments, but they don't have the amended version of the bill up yet. So that's how you can kind of follow along is at some point they'll have like a SB 2249. It'll be like a D1, like a draft 1. That'll be the amended version of the bill. And there'll also be a committee report. So it'll talk about what things were considered and all that kind of stuff. So for every bill, that's how you can kind of follow along, you know, as it moves through the process. So again, generally hold or deferred means that bill is in a rough situation. And obviously passed with amendments or passed unamended means it's moving along to its next committee hearing. So like this one, so it was at Land, Culture, and the Arts. It now goes on to the Judiciary Committee for a second hearing. And if it passes out of there, two committee referrals is usually a pretty good thing. The more committees you have to go through, the more challenging it is. So this one has 2, and then once it makes it through the judiciary, it'll get ready to go to conference, which means the House and the Senate will appoint people to talk about it. So making it through 2 committee hearings is pretty good, but not a guarantee it's going to make it. So anyway, that's like a little bit about process. So as far as our presentation, I mean, really that's all we have, going over the OHA package, talking a little bit about the larger historic preservation landscape, a little bit about process, and sorry if everyone out there knows that, but a little bit about the process of testimony in the legislature. And with that, Kamakana is ready to answer all your hard questions. Just kidding.
Mahalo nui, guys, for presenting with us today. I think you can pick me up from there. But so right now we're going to open up for our question and answer portion. If you are new to Zoom, you can access the question and answers below on the bar at the bottom of your Zoom screen. There should be something that says Q&A, so you can click on that and you can submit your questions. and we'll share that with Keola guys, and they'll get their answers to you. Mike with 26 said aloha.
Aloha, Mike. Long time no see.
Do you want to talk about the transferring of the delegation to the county?
Are there questions
Yeah,
coming?
there's,
Okay.
so we have one question so far. It's how is the bill proposing to delegate the authority under 60 different from the current rules?
Sure. So, yeah, there are multiple bills proposing the delegation of SHPD back to the county. So, I'll take a first stab at it, and then depend on Kamakana and Lauren to also add in. So basically the way it works right now is the county, when they think that there's an activity that could impact cultural sites or other historic properties, which includes bridges and architectural sites or kūpuna, they need to notify SHPD and say, hey, this is what we're reviewing right now under this permit. Can you guys review it and let us know what should happen? And SHPD responds like, oh, you need to do an archaeological inventory survey, and that leads to burial treatment plans, preservation plans, on and on and on. The delegation idea will remove the county's communication with SHPD, and they'll basically have their own in-house county historic preservation professionals, basically, to do all that, themselves. So, yeah, it'll remove the county SHPD interaction, and then really make it the counties are reviewing their own historic preservation issues and making their own determinations. There's multiple bills out there, and all of them are slightly different. Some have more of a clear process how that should happen, like how the counties need to build up and have qualified people on staff and basically have their own program. Others talk about how the burial part of 6E won't go to the county, it'll stay with SHPD. So there's various versions of the idea, but that is the general idea in all of them, that the county will no longer be communicating with SHPD on either a lot of stuff or limited stuff. Kamakana and Lauren, do you want to add into that?
Sure. And as Keola said, there's a couple of different versions of this. The one that should be more cautionary, if you look at bills like HB 2512, which just says that the authority should be delegated to the county, but it doesn't make any mention of like any agreement needing to be made or any type of internal infrastructure that the county would need to actually independently carry out these 6E reviews. And on top of that, those bills, if you read on the bottom, it would grant automatic, which actually HB 2512, the bill would grant automatic approval of HRS 6E compliance after 30 days if SHPD doesn't reply. And it's just not a good idea because SHPD typically takes longer than 30 days to review projects. So, and as Dr. Downer has said on a couple occasions, it can take anywhere from 1 month to 6 months to maybe even a year, depending on the complexity of the project, because sometimes they get reports that are thousands of pages long. So having that type of automatic approval in there is kind of dangerous, we think. On the other hand, you have bills like SB 2076, which delegates to the county, but it has a lot of conditions. It says that you need to have a department qualified archaeologist. There needs to be a revised ordinance that specifically dictates how the county is going to do this. It also says that they need to ensure that internal organization is needed so they can independently carry out the reviews, and then there would need to be a written agreement with SHPD. So in theory, something like that could work, but in reality, we think that it'd probably take the county years to ever achieve that. So it'd probably just be more effective if the county simply hired an archaeologist to help them screen which projects go to SHPD for review rather than fully taking on this delegated responsibility, much in the way that so SB 2076 also has a clause in there for third-party reviews where they set up this program. It doesn't specifically say how they'll do that, but the purpose of the program is to get a third-party archaeologist to screen which projects would go to SHPD. So that's kind of what we're talking about. So again, in theory, like this bill could work, but we don't think it'll work immediately. It'll take them a long time to do this. Lauren, did you have any thoughts?
In addition to screening which permits, et cetera, applications go to the state, they would also be able to make sure that the package was complete that goes to SHPD. According to SHPD, they get a very large number of incomplete submissions, which also leads to the length of review time. So having someone in the county to help prepare the package to go to SHPD as well as screen what needs to go to SHPD would be very helpful in cutting down that length of the review time and just giving them the information that they need up front so that they have everything they can do to conduct a review.
Yeah, and so yeah, Kamakana and Lauren called out some of that kind of the distinctions between some of the different versions of the bill. Kamakana brought up a good point. One bill has like the 30-day automatic approval provision. Another bill has like SHPD can work with third-party reviewers provisions. So like those are examples of how there's like some very distinct differences between some of the bills. That both have the general topic of delegating 60/42 reviews from the county to SHPD, eliminating that and keeping it within the county under certain circumstances.
I have another question. How do I, as a private citizen, support these bills?
Sure. So like if you're looking at the screen right now, like so SB 2076, you can pull up the actual bill itself, take a look. The testimony of others isn't up yet, but you just click on that submit testimony link. And like I said earlier, like once you do that, I think you have to register. Oh yeah, sorry. So you can click on this once you've actually registered. There's probably other ways to do it, but I'm clicking on the hearing notice right now and going down here to click here to submit testimony. And you're seeing that you got to sign in, so email address and your password. And I guess that creates kind of like an account. And then, yeah, you can submit from there. And if you look at other bills that have testimony, you'll see that people follow all kind of formats. Some people just write, I oppose this. Other people write it super formal, like have it formatted with the committee and say, dear chair so-and-so, vice, real formal testimony. But I think the main point is as long as you're expressing opposition, support, or comments and then saying what you think, the format isn't necessarily that important. My suggestion is you be respectful, of course, but the content of your testimony is probably the more important thing to address. So pretty simple once you sign in. I know like we all have many accounts and passwords in our lives, but once you get in, I think it's pretty easy to just start submitting after that. Sorry, did you have something come up?
Oh, do we have any templates for testimony, or we do
Sample testimony.
So yeah, I think for those out there that might be signed up for like OHA's action alerts, as far as templates and sample system testimony, I think there are some examples once you're signed up to that and start getting the alerts. That's not to say that like our samples or our templates are the best, but that's one thing. But I would also say again, once you start seeing bills that have testimony, look through others that have submitted testimony and you'll kind of find a format that resonates with you and kind of works with whatever style you like. Again, some people are real formal. Some people just have like a spreadsheet that has your name and a pose. And that means something in numbers, but again, my suggestion is the more, if you feel really passionate about a bill, whatever the topic is, the more you can speak to like what the issue is and how you feel it should be addressed, the better. But, you know, the only ones that really know like how testimony impacts them is the decision makers, I guess. But yeah, take a look at the other testimony examples and you'll kind of see the different styles and might find one that you like.
We have another question. I believe HAR 13-284 already gives the permitting agency the responsibility to conduct the historic preservation review. How do we get the county's funding to implement that?
Sure. So, yeah, so I think the rules that got cited there are like the rules related to the 6042 statute, but I think you bring up a good point, right? It's like, it's always going to be about, okay, like who, like how do we have the resources to do what we need to do? And I think that is one of the major issues that we've identified in some of our testimony is who at the county is going to be doing these reviews if it happens, right? Obviously, we want it to be qualified professionals, and the counties may have to be basically creating new divisions or programs within their agencies, right? All new positions or repurposing vacant positions. Yeah, it's really going to come out in the testimony, right? And again, if you look through different versions of the bills that talk about the delegation idea, some speak to that way stronger than others and say, before they actually get the delegation, they have to do all these steps. Some actually have to have an agreement with SHPT. And within it is the idea of qualified professionals and meeting certain standards, et cetera, et cetera. But there's no guarantee, right, until we see it happen. But I think to answer the question, it's really going to be what testimony comes in and what the final versions of the bills look like and how they address who's going to be the work if the work gets delegated to the county. Yeah.
Mahalo. How does one sign up for the OHA action alerts?
Good question. I know it's run through our community engagement program division. I don't have the answer right now. After this, what I'll do is I'll get the answer and run it through Kaile and Laakea, and they can send it out to the group. So sorry I don't have the answer right now, but we'll get the answer after this.
And then a question from our end. How can Kaliʻuokapaʻakai best support these initiatives going on at OHA right now and in the legislature?
Sure. I mean, I think, so, I mean, testimony on bills is important, but I do think the stronger statements that can be made about the larger vision of where historic preservation needs to go is probably the kind of messaging that I think decision makers need to hear. You know, what is the change that the collective wants to be the driving force behind, right? Because we're kind of reacting right now, right? I mean, even OHA's package, right? Like we feel that they're justified changes, they're needed changes. But to an extent, we recognize that we haven't talked to all of you out there. Some of you, but not all of you. So right now you're reacting to what we're talking about. and all the bills that we sent out in the Excel spreadsheet, just like us, you're reacting to that, right? But I think for a collective like Kaliʻuokapaʻakai, and I know you guys are well on the way towards doing the work, identifying issues, convening not only the collective but other stakeholders. I think what comes out of that in terms of identifying concerns and then proposing solutions to the concerns, that's really looking ahead to 2021 and 2022, right? Not saying it can't happen, but anything community driven, I think, is challenging right now because we're so into the process right now. But I would say looking ahead towards next year and the year after, what kind of reports and initiatives and solutions come out, the stronger those can be and the sooner the collective can start working with all of the legislature and all of the stakeholders is the key. Because once the session starts, a lot of things are in people's minds already, right? Like what the priorities are. So like, for example, the delegation of 6E as it relates to housing, like that was in people's mind before the session started, right? It's not like these bills got created and people started reacting to them. We're reacting to them, but it was part of an initiative within the legislature already. So the strategy should be keep an eye on what's going on now, and that's important, and we can still shape some of these things and react in a way that is helpful. But look ahead to 2021, 2022, think about, look who the committee chairs are now, and that's gonna change potentially next session, so that's not forever, but understand the process, know who key senators are, because once this session ends, the work for next session is going to begin right away. And there's power in numbers, right? So I think when the Kaliʻuokapaʻakai initiative can speak to not only the content and subject matter expertise, but say, hey, this is who we represent throughout Hawaii, right? It's not just us on Oahu or whatever. We are a statewide initiative with membership. I think that becomes important to shape the discussion. Kamakana or Lauren, did you have anything to add in that, or?
I think what Keola said about thinking ahead and probably having continued discussions going forward, because if our bills or our measures aren't successful, potentially maybe there's the next lead session. But in the event like rulemaking is open, it's going to be a long process and it's not something that's going to be done immediately. So continued dialogue, I think, would also be one of the strategies, as he also pointed out.
In addition to, testimonies and stuff, I mean, there's that old fashioned of contacting your representative, right? Like, yes, you're planting the seed, you're having a discussion, you're expressing your support in that way too. And that, also in sharing with your communities, everyone has their own community, this information and, putting them into getting in touch with their representative. I mean, you can call, you can email, but those numbers count.
Yeah, and as things move along, talk to folks outside of the collective too, I mean, you get good input, and again, there's value once initiatives start in the legislature to say, in addition to the members of our collective, we've talked to lots of stakeholders, right? And even for OHA's package bills, we've spoken with folks that didn't think they were the best things in the world, and it hurts sometimes, but it makes your approach and your understanding of the issue better, right? So there were some things that we didn't think about that we started thinking about once we started talking with folks. So there's definitely strategies and stuff, but it's really about looking ahead and trying for the collective to determine what the collective's priorities are and what change the collective wants to affect, and the strategies to affect the change kind of develop after that. But as long as you have a strong message and purpose and it's justified, like we all know, that's going to carry you through, right? So, yeah.
We just wanted to mahalo you folks again, Keola, Kamakana, and Lauren, for having us here today at Office of Hawaiian Affairs and for sharing with us some of the legislative movements that are happening right now in 2020 and what we can do to stay alert and aware and how we can support where we want to support. But yeah, mahalo guys so much for having us here today. And mahalo everyone who joined us today over this webinar. Again, this is only our second webinar, so we're still, working out the kinks, learning new things. So there's going to be a survey at the end, and if you guys could please answer some of those questions and give your feedback, it would be much appreciated. But mahalo for everybody for joining in and for your questions. We hope that you guys have a great week, and aloha.
Aloha, mahalo.
And our hearing starts at 1:15.
And the hearing is Thursday at 1:15. Don't forget. And we'll email you guys out once more. Also the attachments again. You guys should have already received them. But just so you can see them again, the recording from this webinar is going to be uploaded onto our Huliauapaʻa YouTube. We'll email out that link as well, along with more information on how you can get in touch with or get onto that action alert. Aloha. But yeah, mahalo nui guys. Aloha.